Young, a Taiwanese actor and kung fu movie star. But yeah, so this is an excellent movie, but I think it's not, the title is not the best and advisable research method. Trying to cover everything, everywhere, all at once.
Master Minh MIT's doctoral defense on the 20th of April 2026. On 30th of November 2025, Master Minh MIT submitted a thesis entitled Remapping the Emotional Landscape in Late Song from Early Therapeutic Practices and Visceral Psychosomatics to Chen Wu Zhe's 7 Effects Doctrine, and sought leave to be presented for the degree of Philosophy Doctor of this university. On the recommendation of the Department of Culture, Religion, Asian and Middle Eastern Studies, the Faculty of Humanities appointed the following evaluation committee: Professor Vivian Liu, University College London; Professor Angelika Messner, Kiel University; Professor Jon Ødmark, University of Oslo. Professor Jon Ødmark served as coordinator of the committee. On 17th of March 2026, the evaluation committee reported that it had found the thesis worthy of being defended at a public defense for the degree of Philosophy Doctor. Early today, the candidate gave the prescribed trial lecture on the following topic: discuss methodological problems in combining longue durée and deep description approaches. The trial lecture has been found satisfactory by the committee. Today, the candidate is to defend her thesis in public. The first opponent in the defense will be Professor Vivian Liu, and the second opponent, Angelika Messner. Should any person present wish to speak as an opponent ex auditorio, notice should be given to me before the second ordinary opponent is called upon to speak. Only the in-person audience can ask questions ex auditorio. And I remind you all to turn off the sound.
Say that somehow you're in his lineage, and I was also in his lineage when I was at school in acupuncture college. Of the 5-element acupuncture in the UK, I learned about these 3 courses there amongst a faculty of people who didn't speak Chinese, didn't read Chinese, and who were completely disassociated in a way from the textual tradition. So it survived, and I don't remember now whether it survived with his name attached to it or not, but I think it did, because I recognise the name from that period in my life. So, okay. Your thesis has gone a long way to filling this gap in the literature, the sort of dark ages of the history of Chinese articulation of emotional and psychological distress and illness.
Already on the basic level of medicine, there were this inclusion of psychological and things. And so I think it really spoke to me directly then. And then in my practice, actually, I specialized on psychosomatic and psychological problems and working on that all the time, 28 years now. And for very kind of contemporary stress-related insomnia, sleep disorders, burnout, these kind of things, and trauma, post-traumatic things like that. So that's a completely different world from what I do here, but I guess there's a link in the interest in knowing where these kind of theories came from. So that's my personal interest as a practitioner as well. As an academic, I think, and a historian, I think kind of with a different part of my brain, partly. It's not completely separate, but it's different, because if I read as a practitioner, I look for, and I'm very selective.
To concentrate on. And clearly, history is about change and understanding the causes of change. That's one way of approaching it. So, the period you've chosen, the excavated text, is really of the Han Dynasty, and it's very much the imperial period, the imperial synthesis. So in the Han period, the 400 years of the Han, and particularly in the first 2 centuries there, is where you're seeing the excavated texts arising. And there is a kind of coherence emerging, but it's still very dissipated, as you say. But then, with the whole imperial process of unification, of synthesis, etc., you have a very specific time which is producing a very specific culture that is then set down in texts which are not printed until your period. So that's 1,000 years later. And they're proliferating, they're complex, becoming more and more complex. And so, can you talk, so change happens, some things stay the same, but change also happens, and it happens rather rapidly at certain times. Can you talk a little bit about why the song? You know, what is it? What are the most, you have described the period of the song. I could describe to you the period of the hand and why things. People were trying to synthesize it, trying to bring it together into what became, retrospectively, the canons of Chinese medicine, the classics of Chinese medicine. So what is it about the song that didn't happen in the Tang, for example? And, you know, I could say, is it about, just from my memory of song, which is not my specialty, I would say that there's a burgeoning middle class there. Or, you know, there's a big population, there's more scholars to feel emotions. We'll come back to the social context of how one experiences emotion in a minute. But first of all, what about the external situations that can be, that might lead you to focus on hand and song, which is what you've done?
Yeah, so this is such a broad and interesting question. Let me think. So I think that, first of all, I'm not really sure if there were actually more changes in medicine, in theory and practice, in song than in other periods. But I think those changes became more visible for later times, in part, and for some ideological and structural reasons as well. But I think what I mean to say is I don't think that Chen was particularly more innovative than any of the earlier, medical thinkers. But of course, we have much more preserved from the Song period onward, because that was a time when we had proper printing technology in China, right? So before that, there were mostly hand-copied medical manuscripts, and that makes a completely different kind of foundation for the circulation of medical text. So, and also for the discourse, I think. So some of the kind of, how would you say, almost inconsistencies and differences and variations that you see very clearly in the sources before him, I think is also because, they were not as much, they were looking at very varied material all the time. There wasn't a standardized medical literature as from the Song times onwards. So people have different versions of the same text, and they literally had to hand copy them. It was rare. Medical manuscripts were rare and circulating in a much smaller circles, and the different circles probably. So we have more variation for that reason. And so what really happens in the Song is several things at the same time. So you have, big technological transformations in that you have printing technology that now becomes really mass-produced. And then you have the state and the some governments that really sponsored a lot of textual revisions, all of the classical philosophical canons and also the medical canons, and really about standardizing medical literature. And I think they had the same ambitions as earlier governments, that they really saw that there were lots of medical problems going on in the populace. There were famine, there were war, there were epidemics, lots of things going on, and they wanted to respond to it. And one of the ways they wanted to respond was to make standardized medical theory and teaching. They established lots of imperial teaching facilities, curriculums, and all these things. And by the end of this period, when my author played in the Southern Song, they suddenly now had this medical canon. It was much more available, mass-produced, and also because there were like migration coming down from the north. The north had been invaded, so now there was like immigration to the south and having urbanization happening, much bigger center and commercial centers, and then book. And then you had this whole culture that really boomed around education. Because in the Song Dynasty, it was really the period where the official government decided that they would now select officials for government positions through educational exams. And in the exams, you had to study classical philosophy and history and other universities. And then they made a similar system for medicine. It wasn't that broad, but it was now established, and it set kind of an ideal. And what happened after that is that suddenly much more elite families became interested in medicine. Because before, medicine was more in the inherited tradition, so people had families that had medical traditions, and they were like a bit frowned upon by the elite. They were like medical workers, handcraft people. But now, the emperor, the Song emperor himself, wrote prefaces to medical treatises and promoted medical studies as a way of practicing Confucian benevolence and such. So suddenly now you have much higher elite interest in practicing medicine, and Chen Huzhu was exactly an example of this. So he came from this elite family had positions in the local community, and probably started practicing medicine just the generation before him, his fathers and uncles. And he's really one of the people that really creates this new identity of scholar-physicians. And then when the Southern Song Dynasty starts, and you lose a lot of territory in the north, so there's a collapse of the kind of central administration. They can't be so ambitious in all these big projects in education and stuff. They have to be scaled down. And now it's the local elite that steps up and continues this.
Which is Chinese. But my uncle did, and I would see him once a year, sometimes in New York, and he was a teacher at Columbia in classical Chinese. And one of the days he said to me, frustrated with my Chinese writing, it really took on until I was 30. So he said, just write this character and you will feel exactly as it looks, as it's meaning.
Yeah, yes, I get that now.
So what I want to talk about is visceral psychosomatics, is that right? Or visceral
psychosomatics.
Okay, so I guess you feel it a bit now.
I feel it a bit now. You have to say what the character means.
You say what the character means.
Okay. So this character is supposed to be at least you, which means constrained, feeling very heavy and dense, like an overgrown thing inside of you happening, and that is blocking you. And yeah, so feeling constrained, inhibited, not circulating, and a bit overgrown and dense and packed. Yeah? That sets the mood for
I think he was persecuting me at the time, Uncle. And so we feel a bit depressed when we look at that. Ultimately, this theory of yours is something that I believe you talk about in relation to undermining the dualities, the binaries in Chinese medicine of mind and body. And so this is actually...
He meet genocide, did he heal or cure or diagnose so concrete people suffering of emotions? So this, I would be interested in this. Because of course he had no case stories, yeah? He had no case narratives, no. But my question to you.
So I think it's true. I think, yeah, it's true as you say, he doesn't make case histories, he just had general recommendations for this and this illness, this and this. But I mean, the times that he claims that the inner causes, that is, the emotions and thoughts, excessive emotions and thoughts are involved, is quite high. I mean, he does, of course, have a long list in the beginning of illnesses that comes from what they call external causes, which is all kind of, a whole epidemics and, respiratory diagnosis and rheumatism and different kind of illnesses, stroke even. But then you have a very long list in which he includes and said that, internal causes can be involved here. So I guess from that, since he's making a point of it, it means that he was working like that and thinking like that in his practice. And the other thing is that we have a few records of his students that were actually disciples directly from him, who wrote books as well. And one of them describes different things. My teacher, when he sees the patients, he will be very, very careful to really see how their moods are, how their, how their situation are, and if their emotions change. So I think at least there's one description like that from one of his direct students. So I think he was very concerned with that. At the same time, he does something that is kind of surprising for me, coming from the acupuncture and tradition, is that he both emphasized the importance and impact of thoughts and emotions. He emphasizes that different emotions have different impacts. This has been done before him as well. And then suddenly he says, but in the end, they all lead to constraint. Right? So the people before him, especially those coming from the Acumoxa tradition, they were thinking about how does emotions and thought makes movement, impact movement and circulation in the body. So for instance, they say things like, anger makes it rise. So you become red in the face and you become expressive and upper body things happen.
Yeah, and it is linked to the liver, to the fire in the liver,
Yeah.
isn't it? This is harmful.
Yeah, at least later. But first they just say, they don't
Yeah.
even mention that, they just say it goes down.
Yeah.
And then they say, excessive worry will make the movement stuck in the middle. It will go around, so you will have like digestive problems because it doesn't move, because you're just thinking around and around, right? And they will say if you're fear, it will go down, and you can have acute diarrhea, blockage, and so on and so on. They have this detailed description of different movements. But then Chen suddenly, he is working very differently. I think this is my explanation. As a herbal physician, he doesn't like sit by the patient, oh, you're angry, oh, now I can see your head is going this way. He is looking at the patient, making a very overall estimate of the general situation. He makes a prescription, and then he doesn't see the patient until quite after they have taken that prescription many times, right? So he's not always every day by that patient seeing, oh, today you're angry, it's like that, today you're like sorry, like that, right? He has to make a kind of general idea. So his general idea is that, in the end, even though emotions have different impact, what they do in the end is that they block the functions of the inner organ systems. They make them work less well. They inhibit it. And so he introduces this concept, you. And I think that became, for anyone after him, also very important. That now you can just actually, they have different impact, but the main impact is causing blockage, so we just need to relieve blockage. But I mean, if you work it from acupuncture therapy, you would do different things. Anger, you would do different things than sorrow or that. So I think that really kind of is one of the ways that his practice as a herbal physician makes an influence. And maybe also influence later. Kind of simplifications here, maybe.
How's your leg tests? What you were doing, impressive. It's not often I I attend these defenses and I think people are impressive, but actually you were quite impressive today. And I also wrote innovative. And I think that it showed today that sort of you did solid work, but it also contains a lot of sort of innovative ways of talking about things, and your curiosity have made sort of this not just a piece of solid work, but also a piece of innovative work.
The scriptures being excavated nearly 2,000 years old.
It's our work.
They were made out of bamboo and silk, and they traveled 2,000 years through time and still are legible. That is wonderful.
To have some insight into what my mother was working on. She's really such a cool and admirable person, and she's the only person I can have a lunch break where we go from talking about martial arts, theories of light, to like Taoism and Manichaeism, all in one conversation. And I do really hope me and Mikey have been some support through this whole process, because I know my forgotten dishes